Hello people of the internet, welcome to Paint to Life episode 44, the YouTube channel where we take tiny plastic miniatures, throw some acrylic paint on them, and breathe life into them with storytelling so you might learn something new on the subject or take it, make it your own. Tonight we're going to be learning about the goddess known as Auril the Frostmaiden. She's the main antagonist in the D&D adventure Rime of the Frostmaiden, and we'll be painting all three of her forms. I'm GM Atank, let's get painting. Alright, last week we painted the Nosel's Marvelous Miniatures Diving Griffin, and we learned the story of the Kangi tribe, the first Griffin riders of the Sword Coast. If you missed that episode, you can catch up on it either in the description below or up here if your browser supports the in-video link. Now, some of you eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that on Paint to Life I wear these shirts in a color order: red, gray, blue, then green. Today is clearly a red episode, but vocal members of my own D&D group and my own wife have nagged and convinced me that because this is such a cold-themed episode with the Goddess of Winter, I should wear the blue one instead. And I said, look, who's the boss of this D&D group? Who's the boss of this house? Finally, before we continue, I should say there is a slight spoiler warning for the campaign. If you're playing Rime of the Frostmaiden, very, very small spoiler, just with regards to the final boss. Icewind Dale is a hellishly cold place at the best of times. Auril the Frostmaiden is a lesser god that embodies winter's ferocity, endurance, and cruelty. Also, Auril was pronounced Auril up until 2020, when the designers decided to change her name to Auril. She hoards beauty in all its forms, from art objects to flowers to skilled artisans and their wonderful works, freezing them in magical ice for her pleasure alone. Now every night before midnight, Auril takes to the back of a white rock and weaves her spell, which manifests as a shimmering curtain of light. The aurora illuminates the night sky and fades before dawn, preventing the next day's sun from rising above the horizon, turning midday into twilight and trapping Icewind Dale in winter's dark embrace with no sunlight or warmth to melt the snow and ice. Just when all hope was about to be lost, two adventurers arrived at the largest of the 10 towns, the communities in Icewind Dale, known as Bryn Shander. Both followers of the god Lathander, there was the human male cleric named Aldrich and the female tiefling sorceress named Azrael. You see, Lathander is the god of sunrise, mornings, and light, so through dreams he sent two of his champions up to the Dale to try and sort it out. Azrael spent a few days interviewing companions who might be able to help them before settling on an experienced ranger of the north, a man known as Bergolf. Additionally, Aldrich had procured the services of a competent captain from Bryn Shander named Erwin. Now, their party, known as the Light of the Dawn, was ready to seek out, track down, and bring forth the Frost Maiden to answer for her sins against the sun. Now, they say that the Frost Maiden has been living on a misty isle hidden amongst the bergs on the Sea of Moving Ice to the north. After days at sea, miserable yet comfortably warmed by Aldrich's holy symbol, Erwin the captain spotted it. "That's no iceberg," he said. The massive floating ice ahead, magically shaped into the shape of a snowflake when viewed from above, yet completely obscured by a light fog. Bergolf the ranger was not dissuaded, nor was he disoriented by the fog. "I've lived in Icewind Dale my whole life. I could smell north," he said. And when they landed on the floating island, despite having their bearings, sounds from beyond their sights gave them pause. The cold here was almost unbearable. Various corpses were strewn about, and they had become part of the island's frozen decor. They were worried that they could not hope to best all the manner of foes that lived on this island and still retain enough strength to confront the Frost Maiden. "Yeah, that's a big note," the plucky tiefling sorceress said as she bade them all hold hands, and as her devilish tail flicked back and forth, she magically gave them all the ability to fly. It wasn't actually that much further ahead that they spotted it. Grimskull, a skull-shaped spire formerly occupied by frost giants, jutting upwards out of the center of the ice like a monument to the dread of this place. They landed in front of the fortress. Aldrich's morning star glowed ever brighter with Lathander's light, and he led the group up the steep stairs to the front entrance of the hold. As they explored the first floor of this terrible place, they found a feast hall full of chairs and furniture up to their chest highs. They were made for giants. Now, beyond that feast hall was a room that appeared to be a kitchen. Inside the kitchen, they locked eyes with Auril, a 7-foot-tall biped with a snowy owl head, black talons, cloven hooves, curved goat horns, as well as a rich azure cloak over her shoulders. Aldrich calls for Lathander's blessing, and all of his companions are fortified. The cold crone lets out a frightful shriek. Irwin runs into the kitchen and attacks furiously with his axes. The creature claws at him back with its talons, which he parries. Then it suddenly disappears into a veil of mist, reappearing behind him and clawing at his unprotected back, causing him to wince in anguish. Burgolf lets loose 3 arrows. Each one hit the owl's cloak and appear to sink in. Its talons slash again, however Irwin is now turned and is able to parry. Multiple fiery rays leapt from Azrael's fingers and strike the crone and lighting some of the wooden furniture in the kitchen on fire, creating noticeable heat in the otherwise complete absence of anything like it in this cold place. The crone looks towards the mage and suddenly in the feast hall, fog condenses at the ceiling, opening up into impossible clouds of winter, dropping large stones of ice and hail down on everyone that is there. Azrael, Burgolf, and Aldrich take cover under the ancient wooden tables as more and more heavy cold debris start raining down on them. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Irwin is still frantically fighting, slashed twice by talons. Meanwhile, he gets one solid hit in with his axe before the crone disappears into a vial of mist, only to reappear behind him again and slashes at him critically with her right talon. From under the table, protected from the ice and rocks, Aldrich's eyes light up as his prayer to Lathander echoes through the air, tapping in a counterspelling magic and causing the storm to cease. Azrael takes the opening to jump up and slams Auril with a roaring beam of fire that flies from her hands, which causes the crone to turn gray and melt into a puddle of slush. Burgolf also jumps up, arrow notched, only to look and say, "Was that it?" Aldrich jumps up and rushes over to help Irwin, but he's too late. He's already succumbed to his wounds. His blood is already frozen to the floor, and his eyes are cloudy blue, frozen over. As everyone is catching their breath, remnant of the fire rays are still burning in the kitchen, when suddenly a cold wind rushes down from a staircase leading upwards, blowing out all of the open fires. A terrifying howl followed by the sound of rushing creatures as 3 direwolves round the corner into the feast hall. The ranger Burgolf quickly says, "I've got this, get behind me." "Here, boy." He utters a spell under his breath, allowing him to speak with animals as he continues to growl and bark in a dominant, assertive tone, which causes the wolves to halt their advance and happily start to lick the ranger's hands and some of the food that he's given them. A cool, seductive voice from above echoes inside everyone's head. Even the wolves tip their heads as if they're listening to something.
My servants may find curiosity in the light, but here it is just an illusion.
Suddenly, the wolves immediately get aggressive, knocking the ranger to the ground and start biting at him. "Run!" he bellows to the others as he is torn to pieces by the 3 direwolves. Terrified at the sight, Aldrich and Azrael run up the stairs, slamming and barring the door behind them. They ascend winding stone stairs until the colors of the aurora borealis in the sky greets their faces. From within a densely humanoid-shaped fog, Auril's brittle maiden form appears. She's a 10-foot-tall woman of fearful aspect, made entirely out of ice, holding a morning star that is made of blue ice, and her eyes are burning with cold blue light, while a thin cloak of mist surrounds her. Blades of ice grow out of her body at all angles. Aldrich lets out a war cry as he charges towards the evil deity, all the while his morning star erupts into flame that have the warmth and the brightness of a warm sunrise, and he strikes at her twice in the torso, causing ice chunks to break and melt away. Loose ice scattered around the precipice slowly start to lift up and begin to violently swirl around Auril in a magical wind, striking both Aldrich and Azrael with sharp pokes, and the flame on his weapon gets snuffed out. The tiefling sorceress throws 3 more fire rays at Auril, but the strong gusts of wind cause her aim to falter and only one strikes its target. Auril counterattacks by breaking off a foot-long piece of ice and throwing at the sorceress like a dart, striking and impaling her shoulder. She then strikes Aldrich twice with her morning star. The first attack is blocked by his shield, and the second one too blocked, but with such force it causes the entire icy morning star to shatter, and destroys his shield as well as it falls from his hand. He prays to Lathander and calls down a pillar of flame from the sky, just grazing Auril as she deftly dodges to the side, all the while throwing an ice dagger at him which strikes him, sinking deep into his thigh. Auril then glares at him with an intense hatred for the close call and this holy fire. When 2 more of Azrael's fire rays strike her, Auril throws an ice dart back at her, all the while looking at Aldrich and speaking in a cool, collected, central, surreal-sounding voice.
Wait here.
She then magically creates a gem-sized ice crystal hovering beside her, and then horrifyingly, Aldrich finds himself being pulled towards and then into the frozen prison, disappearing from the battlefield completely. Auril then turns and runs towards the mage, sounding like a crashing chandelier while regenerating her giant morning star in her hand. Azrael tries to hide the look of terror on her face, being the lone combatant against the goddess, but suddenly becomes a blur with defensive magics evoked for her own protection. Auril swings savagely at her 3 times in a row, and on the last manages to connect, causing her to fall to the ground in intense pain. Inside the crystal, Aldrich is feeling intense cold. He knows he must find a way to escape and protect Azrael, but all he wants to do is curl up and sleep. On the verge of passing out, he calls out to Lathander directly for aid while a single ear begins to roll and immediately freezes on his cheek and eye. Suddenly, the small crystal explodes and Aldrich falls prone on the ground beneath where it was. Aldrich's hands, nose, and ears are all frostbitten, his eyes hazy. From his knees, he sees Auril standing atop his battered friend preparing a killing blow, so he calls out, "You will never win. Your winter is over." Auril turns her gaze from the sorceress to the cleric and cuts him off by throwing an ice dart, sinking right into his chest, plunging deep. When she turns back towards the tiefling sorceress, she sees Azrael has been conjuring a large fireball.
Lathander smiles upon you, you cold bitch.
She detonates the fireball point blank, vaporizing herself in the process. Auril staggers backwards away, massive ice chunks missing from her torso and her body, pieces of ice crystal falling from her form, turning into puddles of water on the ground. Aldrich, on the verge of losing consciousness, smiles and says, "There is always another morning." Auril shrieks 1,000 nails across 1,000 chalkboards as Lathander's flame strike drops directly onto her head, causing her to blow up into hundreds of pieces of sharp, melting ice. Satisfied that they have triumphed, Aldrich groans and sits up, leaning back on the battlements, and looks to the east. He smiles as the clouds there are beginning to clear, and a sliver of morning sun can break through for the first time in almost a year. By the time the bitter cold has frozen his body solid, he is already walking in the fields of Elysium with the Morning Lord by his side. However, hovering in the air, radiating intense cold all around it, about 60 feet above, looking down at the high crown of Grimskull, floats a large ice crystal. Known as the Winter's Womb, this 3 feet diameter faceted ice diamond with a sharp point at the bottom contains Auril's very much alive divine spark. The people of 10 towns in Icewind Dale rejoice this day and praise Lathander and their heroes' deeds. The sun greets them again, and everyone is elated. However, the very next night, the regenerated Cold Crone emerges from her lair in Grimskull on the Isle of Solstice, climbs atop her white rock, and again takes to the air, causing the magic to prevent the sun from rising once again. Perhaps you have what it takes to defeat Auril the Frostmaiden. Alright, well that's that. What did you think of my story of Auril the Frostmaiden in her 3 forms? Here they are, for the shelf. So do you think that would entice you to play Rime of the Frostmaiden and try and go and stop Auril yourself? I hope you do, and if you do, head on down to your friendly local gaming store to pick up the book. It seems like a pretty cool adventure, and I might run it with my party as well. So I'm sure some of you guys watching don't actually play Dungeons and Dragons, so I'll tell you that the way that fight wrapped up at the end of this video is kind of similar to how combat would work in D&D, with each person having a round and choosing to do things, and everything they did would be something that a player character of that type and the monster type would have available to it. So that's just there for you to enjoy. Anyways, that's about it. The painting video that ran up here in the corner is available on Tuesday if you want to see how I painted them. Other than that, I'm GM Atank. Thanks for coming by. Wash your hands, people. Hello, people of the internet. What? Oh, that's not gonna work. Need a mic up!